Assistant Secretary Bavishi, thank you so much for joining us. This is a great honor to talk to you in your new role early on in this appointment. And I'm a little bit curious about, you have a very long title, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere. The big title. Can you tell me what that role is, what you're doing?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Emily, and it's great to talk with you today. So my role, as you said, is the Assistant Secretary for Oceans and Atmosphere at the Department of Commerce. I also serve as the Deputy NOAA Administrator. This position is one of two Assistant Secretary level positions. It's one of the two three Senate confirmed leadership positions at NOAA. This one reports directly to the NOAA Administrator. As I mentioned, I also serve as Deputy NOAA Administrator and support the NOAA Administrator as NOAA executes on our priorities of building a climate-ready nation, strengthening the new blue economy, and advancing equity. And my core responsibilities are working with NOAA's oceans, coasts, and fisheries programs to make sure our oceans and coasts are resilient and our fisheries resources are healthy and sustainable. I'm also excited to be involved in the agency's implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. These are truly unique opportunities for our agency to catalyze community impact and climate resilience.
You have a huge history in climate resilience, and this is kind of recent in the past couple of decades, I guess, right? Where cities have this person who's in charge of climate resiliency. It's so necessary now. So can you tell me what you did for New York City?
Absolutely. My role in New York City was to serve as the director of the Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, and I implemented over a $20 billion portfolio of resilience projects focused on sea level rise, coastal storm surge, extreme heat, and extreme precipitation. And we were essentially working to prepare New Yorkers who are most vulnerable for the impacts of climate change.
You have a really interesting education too, both in policy as well as city planning. So it's almost a combination of two really important things. Do you find that really useful in what you're doing now?
Absolutely. My goal is to help make science-based decisions so that we can serve communities that are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And I'm excited to bring that experience to NOAA, especially during this moment where we've got these new funds from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, unprecedented funding. And they represent a chance to jumpstart projects along our nation's coast to restore habitat, create capacity in coastal communities, and to address climate hazards. My hope is that these investments will be a catalyst for this type of work, not a one and done to push money out the door.
Yeah, I interviewed Michael Morgan when he was first appointed as well, and we talked about his goals a little bit, and one of them being about warnings and warning systems being equitable. So I want to ask you about climate resiliency and equitability there. How do you work to make everyone resilient to climate change?
It's a great question, and I'm so glad that you raised that, Emily. Equity is an important priority. That advancing equity is an important priority of the agencies, and it's something that I'm certainly hoping to focus on and contribute to. We're really focused on at NOAA improving NOAA service delivery to help community partners become more resilient, climate ready, and prosperous. What this looks like in practice is that NOAA is in continuous dialogue with the communities that we serve, whether that is areas we forecast for, schools we work with on educational products, resilience planners who use NOAA's climate data. We want to make sure that we're providing products and tools and being in dialogue with these communities rather than having no feedback loop. We're also focused on making sure that we're supporting these communities with funding, not only for implementation, but for capacity building. We want to meet these communities where they're at. And that means that we need to carve out some funds to build capacity, engage with new partners, and set these communities up for success and implementation further down the line.
What kind of holes are you seeing in the system now and holes in the system back, say, around Hurricane Katrina?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think during Hurricane Katrina, this whole field of climate resilience was completely new. We weren't really talking about proactively reducing the risk to these kinds of disasters. We were just responding to the last one. And frankly, even in New York City, I oversaw the implementation of an over $20 billion portfolio of resilience projects. Most of that was funded by disaster recovery dollars after Sandy. I think the unique moment that we're in now is that we actually have funding to deploy, large amounts of funding, historic levels of funding, to address these challenges proactively and with an equity lens. And that means that, what we've seen so far is that the communities that are furthest ahead on climate resilience are often the communities that have recently been impacted by a disaster, because that's where the money has flowed. And so we need to make sure that we're reaching communities that are still facing these challenges, often the chronic impacts of climate change, like sea level rise or drought or extreme heat, that don't receive disaster declarations and trigger disaster recovery funds, but still cause havoc in communities and cause problems both just in terms of the way people live their day-to-day lives or economic challenges. We want to make sure we're meeting those communities where they're at and building the capacity to plan to respond to those challenges.
That can sound really overwhelming and big to perhaps somebody listening or watching. Is there something that citizens can do that can make a difference in this effort?
Absolutely. There are definitely things that citizens can do. Citizen science is so important to understanding how these impacts are playing out. So look for citizen science programs in your communities. Sometimes they're hosted by universities. Sometimes they're hosted by community groups. In New York, we had a neighborhood that was being flooded regularly during high tide. They created a Facebook group where they were just documenting what it meant to have this high tide flooding in their communities. And it was so helpful to decision makers in the city to understand how to respond, to really get a better sense, a sharper sense of what it meant to be facing sea level rise in this low-lying community. That's one thing that people can do. And the other thing I would say is just look out for community meetings, get involved in the conversation. This can seem big at first, but community input and really understanding community priorities is so important to local, state, and federal decision makers. We want to do this in partnership with communities. And that community input can help us make sure that these investments are not just going to making communities safer, which is absolutely the first priority and is incredibly important, but we can also achieve other co-benefits with these large investments, things like improving recreational amenities in communities, restoring habitat for species, making sure that we're creating opportunities for carbon storage. Often we arrive at these other priorities by talking to communities and understanding what they need the most. This is an incredibly unique moment for NOAA and the entire country. We've got an unprecedented opportunity to deploy funding without being in disaster recovery mode. And we want to make sure we use that to help communities plan for a future with climate change and develop solutions that support a healthy environment and economic development.
It's an exciting time for new leaders as well. So congratulations to you and everybody at NOAA. And this is great. I'm very excited for the future.
Thanks so much, Emily.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. While you're here, check out some other videos you just may like.